to the host, Professor Emeritus Good afternoon, everyone. With the look of things, I'm going to anchor this program briefly before the real anchor, Professor Emeritus Bewaji, takes over from me. The idea behind this program is to actually connect what we are doing at the university level, which is to generate knowledge, to the town. That is, the program, the lecture is being brought into bear in order to connect the gown with town. And that is why we have invited people from different parts of the world to come and listen to how philosophical discourse can help us to address environmental challenges that we confront in our world today. It is on this note, I will now invite the head of Department of Language, Linguistics, and Philosophy at the University of the West Indies, Jamaica, Dr. Vivek Missing White, to give our opening remarks. Thank you.
Okay, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, Professor Sylvia Cohenberg, and Coordinator of Philosophy, Dr. Rotimi Omoshulu, other distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, treasured students, good day to you. I am delighted to welcome all of you to this, our 2024 Philosophy Public Lecture, being hosted by the Department of Language, Linguistics, and Philosophy in the Faculty of Humanities and Education on the Mona campus of the University of the West Indies in Jamaica. Ladies and gentlemen, in this department of Language, Linguistics, and Philosophy, we focus on matters related to language, writing, speaking, philosophical thought, knowledge, reality, existence, what it means to be a student, a citizen, what are ethically appropriate behaviors, and so on. And we value scholarly inquiry, the sharing of knowledge, vigorous debate, and discussion of ideas to increase our understanding of the world, our roles, and our responsibility in it. To help us to maintain our department's commitment to fostering intellectual curiosity and critical thinking, we host events like this public lecture, in which we hear from distinguished speakers from a range of places and spaces. So today, I extend an extra special welcome to Dr. Olusegun Samuel, a distinguished research fellow from McGill University's Department of Philosophy in Canada. Dr. Samuel will be sharing on Ubuntu's place in justice ecology. Ubuntu, a concept deeply rooted in African philosophy and known by other terms such as Bomoto in the Congo region, Gimuntu in Angola, Ubotoshi in Zimbabwe, and Umuntu and Ubuntu in Uganda, emphasizes the interconnectedness of humanity and the importance of community and compassion, respect, and cooperation. If you have begun to think about arrangements such as a kumbite in Haiti or a day-for-day in agrarian communities in Jamaica, you may be on the right track. For in the context of ecology, our guest speaker's theme promises to offer rich insights into how our interconnectedness shapes our environmental attitudes and ethical frameworks. I anticipate that Dr. Samuel's expertise and research will provide a thought-provoking exploration of Ubuntu's relevance in contemporary discourse, shedding light on its potential contributions to addressing pressing societal and environmental challenges. I look forward to the critical reflection and constructive conversation that his interdisciplinary approach and insightful analysis will inspire among attendees this afternoon. So special welcome, Dr. Samuel. Welcome, welcome, welcome again, everyone.
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, I had some technical glitch initially. I want to thank Dr.
Okay, so welcome now, our moderator, Professor
Yes.
Emeritus John Biwaji. Welcome, Professor.
Yes, thank you so much. Sorry for that. And the head of department has so ably set the template. My task is actually the simplest of all. So after that kind of introduction from the head of department, what else is left to say? The marriage of Ubuntu and justice ecology, which Dr. Olusegun Stephen Samuel will be speaking to, should be something that should interest all of us. So I want to thank everybody who have made time, who have found the time to be here, and especially the guest speaker, the Language, Linguistics, and Philosophy Department and the Philosophy section, ably anchored by our own Dr. Mosulu. I want to thank everybody for making this possible. If you look at the program, the next speaker will be the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, and that is Professor Sylvia Cohenberg. Professor Cohenberg, you are welcome.
Apologies, colleagues, I just lost connection for a few minutes, but it seems to have been reestablished. Here is Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education to say a hearty welcome to this public lecture on Ubuntu's place in justice ecology. The term Ubuntu, Dr. Milton White already said something about the term Ubuntu. I recall how the term Ubuntu came to global attention after it was brought to global attention by post-apartheid South Africa. And for a while, it was a term that made the rounds and was considered very relevant to people's, both people's daily lives and the political and social systems in which they operate, given how the term sort of foregrounds and speaks to our common humanity and provides a basis for solidarity and altruistic decision-making, but it has really faded from the limelight. So I think this is an interesting time to put it back in the spotlight, a time in which humanity is facing an uncertain future, deriving from our very poor stewardship of the natural environment. There is now an increasing recognition that there are many cultures around the world that do a lot better in stewardship of the natural environment than cultures based in Western capitalism and liberal thinking. And then if we add to that the breakdown of communication resulting from our era of political polarization, it seems that we really are living in an era of renewed relevance of the Ubuntu concept. So I see that it's going to be explored today by Dr. Olusegun Samuel in relation to environmental justice discourse. And I think that is sort of just the beginning, because it is pretty clear to me that the term Ubuntu has very wide relevance to our daily lives and practices. So Professor Fawadi, thank you for having me here today. Dr. Omosulu, Dr. Nelson White, friends and colleagues, and especially distinguished guest, Dr. Olusegun Samuel, on behalf of the Faculty of Humanities and Education. I wish all a very productive seminar.
Thank you so much for that welcome from the faculty, which I also believe represents the university, which you are capable of doing so ably. Now on the program, we have the introduction of the guest lecturer, and that will be done by Ms. Kimaha Connell. Ms. Connell?
Hello, I'm here. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my honor to introduce to you Dr. Olusegun Samuel, who is currently a research fellow at the Department of Philosophy at McGill University in Canada. Dr. Olusegun holds a BA in philosophy from Lagos State University, an MA with distinction in philosophy from the University of Lagos, Nigeria, and a PhD in humanities and languages philosophy at the University of New South Wales, Australia. Before joining McGill as a research fellow, Dr. Samuels was a research scholar at the Center for Research in Ethics, Department of Philosophy, the University of Montreal, Canada, and a research fellow at the University of Tübingen, Germany. Dr. Samuels' main research interest is in applied philosophy, comparative ethical philosophy, and metaphysics. He has a number of publications which have been published in international journals. A few of these, the title of his publications are Critique of Theodos Smith's Modal Relational Account of Moral Status, and Africa versus West on reparations. Some of his more recent publications include Ubuntu Thinking on Biodiversity Loss. This was published in the Journal of Applied Ethics in 2003 and co-authored with Rotimi Omosulu. And another title is Practicing Ubuntu. That was published in 2003, Addressing Fragmented Human-Non-Human Interaction, and Ubuntu and the Problem of Belonging. These are some of the publications Dr. Samuels has done. He has received numerous scholarships, fellowships, and grants over his career, including the Lagos State University Scholar Award, International Postgraduate University Award, and he is also a member to several organizations. He's a member of the Canadian Society for Study of Practical Ethics, the Australasian Association of Philosophy, Center for Interdisciplinary and Intercultural Studies, and the African Environmental Ethics Association. With such an impressive bio, I am sure that we're in for a treat with Dr. Samuels's public lecture. So please join us in welcoming Dr. Olusegun Samuels.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Connell, for the introduction. I would like to appreciate the department. I'd like to appreciate the Department of Language, Linguistics, and Philosophy. Thank you so much, the Dean and Professor Emeritus BYG. And lastly, I would like to appreciate everyone at the Department of Coordinator of Department of Philosophy, Dr. Omoshulu. Today, I'll be talking on the title, Ubuntu Place in Justice Ecology. And I'll be talking about Ubuntu, which is a linguistic, or what we call a tool by which we can interrogate justice concern. So the central concern will be on justice ecology, while I will show how Ubuntu could help us even navigate some of the practical concerns that we face in contemporary times. So let's talk about the concept of justice ecology before I go into details to show you what I will be discussing. Clarification is important so that we can put our clarity into our thought. So the term justice ecology refers to the domain of justice concern. And broadly, this concerns covers a lot of issues, that of environmental issues, political issues, economic knowledge, and even moral concern. So when we talk about justice ecology, we are looking at justice concern as a whole, as it affects humans and non-humans, as it affects global and non-global community. So what will I be doing in the course of this talk? My core focus is to unpack major intellectual successes in Ubuntu-inspired environmental justice thinking. Why I'm looking at justice thinking is because the idea of justice, environmental justice, covers all aspects of justice that we'll be looking at, which I'm going to show us in the course of the discussion. So in order to do this, I'll be making one important claim, that the neglected progress in Ubuntu environmental thinking between 1999 and 2022 can provide a substantial trajectory change in justice ecology. The point is that when we understand what has been neglected, then we can see how African ideas or perhaps Ubuntu philosophy can help interrogate and address some of the complex problems that we face in contemporary times, not only in African community, but in a global dimension. So the center focus is for us to highlight the fact that some Ubuntu scholars have contributed to the discourse of justice and also contributed to discourse environment, but those areas, those conceptions or perspective or theories of ideas have been neglected even by Ubuntu scholars and even the global community, as we shall see in the course of this discussion. So let me tell you in a simpler term what I'll be doing in this talk. The first thing is to show the complexity of justice concern. So when we understand the complexity of justice concern, then we'll see how we can speak to environmental challenges within the African space. And we're going to bring out key elements of Ubuntu thinking in how we can navigate the environmental challenges which I talk about in the second section. And I will now discuss how the relevant progress that have been neglected could help provide some interesting recommendation for addressing concrete problems. Though I'll be looking at this from philosophical angle, but my view is that, or my intention is to show that philosophical discourse has a very important role to play in how we navigate real life concern. So let's look at the complexity of justice concern. This is the most important part. When we understand the complexity of justice concern, it is easier to see how environmental problems raises concern for people within the African community and outside that community, including those in the Caribbean or even other developing countries. Let's see the justice concern. Our justice concern, as I said earlier, is complex because justice concerns intersect. And when we say justice concern intersect, then it shows that we need to understand how justice concerns operate in the real world so that we can see what we need to do in order to address them. And the second concern is justice concerns are interest-driven. So when we talk about justice, it's important to stress the importance of the interest in play in trying to grapple with this problem. For instance, when we look at justice concern as something that intersects, then you look at this picture, for example, it shows us clearly how we need to understand the interconnectivity between justice issues. For example, if we are trying to address environmental concerns, environmental concerns could lead to more of economic issues and political tensions between nations. In order to solve environmental concerns in Africa, for example, then we need to look at the framework on how political concerns influences that concern and how economic interests also play into it. So the interconnectivity now shows that in order to grasp economic problem, we should also have our gaze on the environmental concerns and the political concerns that play into it. Just as when we're looking at the political concern, we will see how political interplay or power relations play into economic concerns that we face in our complex society that we find ourselves. So now, let's see how interest play into this discourse. Interest manifests in various ways. The first thing that we should take cognizance for, interest manifests in resource use and distribution. So for example, in North America where I am, because we need to use energy in order to preserve ourselves, for example, there's a lot that is going on into the atmosphere, maybe use of energy consumption can trigger economic challenges for those outside our domain. And when we look at the second dimension of policy planning in terms of the environment also reflect power, so that when we talk about at the level of the United Nations, there's this conception that the less developed country or developing countries are marginalized, are exploited. And maybe the way the United Nations is organized or instituted, there's still an unfair power play or imbalance of power distribution, so that the idea of power sharing becomes a matter of concern for us. But how does interest play into a knowledge system? Sometimes when we evaluate things that are important for society, even at the level of United Nations, there's something that comes to mind. The criteria and standard of evaluation becomes whose standard. Does the standard incorporate the interest of people outside that domain? So when we take this complexity into context on how interest drives environmental justice concern, then it gives us a better understanding of what we need to take into cognizance in addressing our problem. Now, let's take a pictorial glance on one of the things that affects our thinking in terms of interest-based orientation. Let's look at this picture, for example. I'll look at picture one is koala. Koala is an animal which we cherish and love so much in Australia, and this animal can only be found in Australia. So when Australia, country like state like New South Wales, for example, designs their environmental policy with regards to animals inclusion, then koala will constitute one element of those animals which Australian community, for example, we prefer compared to other animals which are not within their domain. Such as when you look at Uganda, look at the second animals, and when you see woodland caribou is found in Central Europe and somewhere in Canada. So this animal cannot be found in Nigeria. So when Nigeria, for example, designed their environmental policy about animals that will be that count or should be taken cognizance of or into consideration when we design our biodiversity policy. Both koala and woodland caribou won't find their way into our policy. So, but the third one is found somewhere in Southern Africa, and this becomes a concern for Africans that this animal, or depending on what their interest is, if the interest is preservation of people who are in want or in need, or people who want to survive. So this animal, if climate change threatens such animals, it becomes a concern for people who feel that what is important for their survival or their well-being has been affected by activities from other countries. One thing that seems very interesting in this pictorial glance is to see that Australia, for example, might not include woodland caribou in their local biodiversity policy, just as Uganda will not include koala if they have not encountered koala, for instance. And if they even want to draft local policy and concern, then it becomes a matter of tussle. Then when we talk about interest, this interest spread across between men and women, between humans and animals, between local and global community. So we need to have this picture when we have our gaze on complexity of environmental concern. So now let's see what we need to take into cognizance. The first point, my first claim is it is essential to take the intersection of justice concern and how interests play into this concern as central to our justice discourse. Because when we bring this to the table, it opens up our understanding of what we need to take into cognizance in relating to the environment and reacting to environmental concern as they affect us. But the key concern or the key question for me is, how does the above view influence justice discourse in Africa? Well, let me show you how this becomes a very serious concern for us. Environmental challenges within the African space is something that we need to start reflecting on, and scholars have actually looked at different ways we can address this problem. But first, let's look at the challenges and how they manifest. In the African context, key examples of how interests manifest negatively are through the concerns of colonization and environmental externalities. These are key concerns if we are looking at how we are trying to address problems within the African space. Colonization is something that we have experienced in the past, and colonization involves deliberate seizing of another person's territory or seizings of another territory. And not only territories, a lot goes on. A lot of things are affected when colonization took place. First, it affects the people's sovereignty, ability to govern themselves. I'll talk about resources and their agency. So when we try to address the problem of colonization and how the economic activities of others through the impact of colonization has affected people living in other regions, then we'll start looking at the sovereignty, we'll start looking at the problem of resource use and how whether the people have the ability to address the problem within their domain. There's some erroneous and complicated claims in the literature that some people cannot address this problem unless they source the solutions elsewhere. And the second concern is environmental externalities. And this happens as a consequence of the activities of a country that negatively affect another country, where the latter is not compensated or duly compensated. So when we talk about environmental externality, we are talking about deliberate actions or perhaps not intentional action of certain people within their community trying to meet their basic need, or perhaps trying to use the resources within their basic need. And by so doing, they create tension within the environment such that greenhouse gases are emitted into the atmosphere. And in the striking point is that those who do this perhaps might be trying to meet their basic need, but in the process, they enjoy some benefit, and others who do not enjoy that same benefit suffer certain consequences, and they are made vulnerable by the activity of those who deplete the environment, for example. So when we talk about environmental externality, we need to take into cognizance that a site and its inhabitants bear the cost of the environmental activities that they do not cause. So that is the experience of Africa, where most problems of climate change are really felt by the people who did not cause them, and the fact of colonization, and perhaps we could say coloniality in the context of some other scholars have extended this problem into the contemporary times. And how do we address these challenges? They are just complex challenges, but how do we solve them is the key concern. And both scholars have solutions that they've offered in the context of our understanding of the environment. So when we understand what Ubuntu or inspired thinking can offer, then we could see how Ubuntu community can even help other indigenous community outside the Ubuntu community to be able to see ways that problems can be solved in more practical sense, rather than engaging in all I call it game blaming and some other activities that do not directly address the problem. So let's say I'll first give an insight into the general nature of Ubuntu. This is important so that we can see what have been neglected in the course of our discussion. So Ubuntu thinking is a mode of looking and acting. Ubuntu is just telling us, when Ubuntu scholars say, look this way, they are telling you that, oh, look at this stuff in the way I'm looking at it, and if the way I'm looking at it is the appropriate way to look at it, then it is better for you to act appropriately. So we're going to show how Ubuntu can change our gaze in how we address this problem, the problems we've identified above. So Ubuntu is often captured by the aphorism, I am because we have. But this aphorism has two parts. It has the ontological part and the ethical part. The ethical part will come later, but let's look at the ontological part, because this is the central part that will expand our gaze in how we confront our problem. So the two key elements of Ubuntu thinking is internationality and locatedness. And this mode of seeing has four conditions, or we can say four preconditions. The first precondition is precondition 1. You see that smaller cycle, it says no being is an isolated entity. So when you pick any being whatsoever, human, animals, tree, you can see that they cannot exist on their own. Tree layers relaxed on the soil. Humans are relaxed on animals through, and this constitutes a certain important aspect of their being. So when we take into context that no being is an isolated entity, then we could see that we are always attached to something. So the point 2 says that no being is self-sufficient. So if I am not an isolated being, that means I depend on something else for my survival. So when I think about the complexity of environmental concern, I should be thinking that I am not trying to address environmental problem as a whole, because we've seen scholars talk about we're trying to achieve a non-exploitative system. We want to achieve a non-exploitative system. But when you put other non-humans into the context, you can see that it raises a concern for our gaze. So the third point says that no being is unlocated in a site. So when we look at any being whatsoever, it is located somewhere. So our gaze of location should be more broader, such that we look at trees, for example, we see it as a location of animals, their domain, or we could say their habitat. We look at river, we see that it's the domain of some sea animals, and we look at trees. So when we take the context, look at people in the villages, people in cities, and people in the global community. So the activities of one within the Western society, for example, can impact those outside the Western society, just as those outside the Western society can impact those within the Western society. So the fourth condition is that our interaction impact others. So if our interaction impact others, then that is where we need now to pause to see to what extent is our action impacting others. So Ubuntu thinking there seeks to build communion and address injustice. So the line 4 is what strikes us the most, that since our action can impact others, just as we've seen that of externalities and the problem of colonization, then we can see how Ubuntu could help us build communions and address injustice. And injustice, not injustice to humans, but injustice to other beings as well. So let's talk about key element of Ubuntu in a more deeper dimension, where we'll look at the contributions that have been made in the past years. A lot of scholars have made contributions. For the sake of this talk, I'm going to reduce it to 3 scholars, and I'm going to show how these scholars' ideas could help the neglected part of their thought, could help drive interesting solution to environmental concern. So I'll be looking at Edwin. Edwin is a scholar at University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. Munamato is a scholar at Great Zimbabwe University, and Michael Eze also is a university. All these guys are Ubuntu scholars. And in order to penetrate this discussion, I'll be looking at the problem. I'm looking at the 3 concepts. The first is decolonization. How Ubuntu could help decolonization. We've seen that decolonization has been a major concern for contemporary environmental scholars, or perhaps political scholars and economic theories. But Ubuntu environmental thinking has a suggestion on what we can do to improve, to address the problem of colonization and perhaps coloniality. And we're going to look at the concept of humanness and cosmopolitanism. These 3 concepts will form the basis of our discussion of this scholars' thought. So I'm not really talking about these scholars by saying everything that they've done, but I'm saying the important part of their thought, looking at it from the dimension of this thought, and teasing out the neglected point, and that neglected element are those that we're going to engage fully. So if colonization and its effects and environmental externality are a problem for us, how can we address them? I think the concept of decolonization is something that we are going to talk about that seems very interesting for unraveling the problem. So let's look at Edwin. Edwin is a scholar in South Africa that have talked about decolonization, and he has looked at decolonization from two dimensions. He looks at it from total decolonization, and he also look at it from moderate or what we call partial decolonization. And total decolonization on simple term involves the approach that tries to engage in complete decolonization, complete disconnection, or complete dismantling of those things, or dismantling in that context means breaking down of those things that has led to colonization in the first place. So if the West has led to decolonization, total decolonization wants to separate from the West. I want to separate from the West, and we could find this in discussion on decolonization, curriculum decolonization. We'll talk about moral decolonization, conceptual decolonization. But Edwin felt that decolonization should not be total in the sense that other scholars are looking at it, and I agree with him. So decolonization for him is the transplanting of some colonial legacy. So for him, we need to be able to remove those aspects of colonization that constitute a problem for development in Africa, or for environmental, or the one that constitute environmental concerns for Africa. So his argument, I paraphrase, colonization destroyed that which was distinguishably has. So in that sense, colonialism destroyed our heritage, our cultural world outlook. But in the process of doing this, colonization comes with something very nice. It does not only distort it, there's some element of it that that could be compatible to our valued way of looking at things. And so total decolonization is anti-Ubuntu. So why is it anti-Ubuntu? It breaks the conditions 1, 2, 3 of the Ubuntu ontology we discussed about discussed earlier. So it distorts the thinking that we are not isolated in society, we are together with others. It distorts the idea that we're not self-sufficient. So total decolonization just want to make us more sufficient. So the conclusion from his talk is that we need moderate decolonization. And why is this thing important? Why is moderate decolonization important? Or why is decolonization important for environmental, for unraveling or addressing environmental challenges? The argument is that Western paradigm do not fully speak to all environmental needs in Africa. One would pick the example that we showed through the picture of how interest is driven through environmental thinking. For example, in Australia, koala is fundamental to the Australian community. Koala is an animal. So when we talk about animals, there are still animals that are ranked above other animals within the context of community practice. So, but the interest of Africans might not, for example, be the protection of koala, might be the protection of, let's say cat, let's say mouse, for example. So what Edwin is saying is that we need to look for an approach that speaks to our concern in order for us to be able to even address a problem. So our concern is something that really matters. So Ubuntu emphasizes inclusive participation of marginalized or vulnerable people. So there, if we are going to take that standpoint, then we require a moderate decolonization. So, but unfortunately, other Ubuntu scholars that have written in contemporary times, even between 1999 and 2022, just for example, Moyo is also an Ubuntu, or she's also an Ubuntu scholar. She missed this point by thinking that we need to dismantle, we need to disconnect, we need to break everything that appears that is not hers, because everything that comes with colonization, maybe institutions that come with colonization, or the political structure that comes with colonization. So, but one major concern is how to decolonize moderately. Dream did not pay more attention. It did not provide substantial explanation for this solution, but it just suggests moderate decolonization. But there's something in Ubuntu thinking that I suggest can help us address or achieve this moderate decolonization. And I found something very interesting in Eze's idea of epistemic reconciliation and MonaMedia idea of plurality. These are useful concepts. Let me show you how this idea that have been neglected. Like I said, the neglected ideas we found is that we require moderate decolonization, but how can we address it? Let's see what our scholars have said that other Ubuntu scholars have not taken into context in expanding our idea of decolonization that might help us address environmental concerns. Let's look at Eze. Eze talks about epistemic reconciliation. I consider this to be a tool for decolonization. So epistemic reconciliation is an intercultural dialogue that recognizes difference. The first thing that we saw in the life of colonization is that it distorts our difference. Those that are unlike us are colonized, even the animal space and human space. So the argument for Eze is that every encounter becomes a transformative learning experience. So when we encounter others, we are not necessarily interested in distorting their experience, just as we experience in terms of colonization. So this requires intercultural dialogue, and it is this intercultural dialogue that can marks the strangeness. At a point in history, people in the developing countries were colonized because those in the West, some of their thinkers believe that they are untutored, they are unschooled, or perhaps they are unlettered. So as a result of this, they need to be colonized so that they can be civilized. So it's because they do not make intercultural discourse possible, they do not engage in interculturally with the people. They will have seen a lot of wisdom that are massive, very impressive for confronting real life problems, just as a plan. So the conclusion of Eze Dasenbeck Vita is that epistemic reconciliation requires unconditional recognition of difference, such that if you are an Ubuntu scholar and you are talking about Western the Western system as colonized, or perhaps as created a kind of discontinuity between you and them, then an Ubuntu scholar also should not also involve in that thing. Otherwise, you are also creating or furthering the wrong of colonization. So the second neglected contribution that needs to take into cognizance is we must not only focus on what we have in common, as we found in colonization, in the terms of colonization, African versus the West, in deciding what counts. You see that Africans, things within the African community do not count as such. And we see that more in anthropocentric thinking. Some African ideas also have this idea of anthropocentric thinking. But Ubuntu is saying that, is suggesting that we need to not focus only on ourselves, but focus on others and recognize difference. In order for us to recognize difference, that means that we need to move a step in building the concept of justice. So how can this contribution help shape justice ecology? The recognition of difference for me is a kind of concept of plurality. And this is an interesting thing that MonaMedia discusses in his idea of plurality and is plurality approach to inclusion of others within the realm of moral consideration. So ecological justice mirrors the intertwined nature of beings and the administrative and recognition of plurality. So MonaMedia For him, he saw environmental challenges as something that impacts humans and other beings. It also impacts animals, soils, and tree, so that full recognition is recognition of the relator and their ways of being. So if we are going to talk about recognitions that helps address these concerns, then the full recognitions must extend also to the relator. The relator are other beings, humans, it could be other gender, and it is something very interesting when it talks about decolonization as a feminist struggle. And this very important thing is the argument. Some beings have a purpose for existing. So when we look at their purpose, it can be a concern for us that other beings can be harmed, some can commune with others, some are alive, and some can attain well-being. And it also talks about physical environment, that physical environment participates towards the completeness of our lives. So we are not even distinct or separated from them, such that when we talk about our plurality, humans and animals beings are intricately related, and such that what happens to X could happen to Y. One thing that seems very interesting in his talk that I consider has been neglected, that we need to be taken into cognizance when we talk about solutions later on. You see, we must focus on the environment and its multiple inhabitants. So when we talk about justice, then justice is not environmental justice, not justice for human. Just as we have ecological justice for animals, that the environment, the social, and the ecological are interconnected. And when we understand this, so the neglected contribution is for us to not focus on these multiple inhabitants. So how can we protect them when justice concern intersect? I've said that justice concern intersect, and this is a kind of puzzle. But how can we move from this intersection? Because when we try to pursue our human needs, we use the environment in such a way that other animals are affected, or perhaps trees are overused. The experience of bushfire in Australia is something that might interest us. That when something happens to the forest, it also affects all the animals within it. So in the process of constructing roads, sometimes we might destroy trees. And what do we do when we destroy trees? So how can we protect them when justice concern intersects? Let's look at the concept of humanness. Humanness is something that Ubuntu scholars have used. But how do we understand humanness in the concept or in the context of this global discourse? Humanness is statically captured by the aphorism, a person is a person through other person. And for Etiebo, the aphorism instigates us to build a humane or communal relationship. So the conclusion would be that to build a human relationship is to take others' project as ours. So Ubuntu, in the context of Etiebo's talk, is that when we talk about humanness, or we talk about personhood, we are building someone who is not only self-driven, but the person needs to take other people's project, such that if people in Australia, people in Canada, people in UK are acting based on their environmental policy, they will consider the impact or the implications of their policy, the implication of the action on those outside their domain, because they are internally related. The activities that is done in one place affect those in other places. So the concept of care is striking in how Etiebo wants us to understand the humanness. For Eze, when we look at the aphorism, it strikes an affirmation of one's humanity through recognition of others in our uniqueness. So when we look at I'm a person is a person through other person, the first person that is relating, that is not isolated from others, also gets his or recognition of a selfhood from his interaction. So we cannot be human alone. So to be humane in the context of Eze is to affirm oneself and recognize others. So, but when you are recognizing others, who are the others that you are recognizing? Monamoto I'll emphasize that this aphorism speaks to the concern of well-being of the community that we're talking about. A person is a person through other person is talking about the community as a whole. And so the emphasis is on well-being of the community. So in order for us to be humane now, we need to act in a humane way towards the community. So thus, a person cannot be humane while treating non-human aspect of the environment as well. So what is the neglected point? When you look at Ubuntu scholars have talked about humanness, but there's something that is missing that they're trying to emphasize that scholars need to start to build on and to generate ideas in addressing complex problems. And this point is justice is interactional, and humanness is a condition for environmental justice. Justice is interactional in the sense that when we have the issue of feminism, for example, is a crisis about how the male counterpart interact with them in the contemporary time. If we look at humans, we look at environmental justice, it could be the case on how humans interact with the environment. If we look at global justice, it can be the way the local community or the global community, Western community interact with other indigenous community, even within their economy, within their own site and outside it. So how can this thinking help in the global world? So now that takes us to the concept of cosmopolitanism, which is something that Ubuntu scholars have really emphasized. And I think this is a third concept, and after this, we'll show how it works for us in the global context. So cosmopolitanism is the view that all human beings belong to a single community or a single world. But the concept of cosmopolitanism is trying to address the political discourse, but it has not taken into cognizance the element of Ubuntu that not only all human beings, but all other beings also inclusive. So for a table, since Ubuntu advances caring for others, then it is unacceptable to sacrifice our obligations to others based on partiality. So Ubuntu's table is arguing against the interest argument. It considers interest that's if we talk about humanness to be something that is civic or caring, then the West, for example, have obligation to other people and they cannot pursue their interests. And this strikes another concern for us. For Eze think that the appropriate way to look at this is the emphasis Ubuntu emphasizing recognition of our difference. So since we are not focusing on what we have in common, and we're turning our attention to our differences. So recognition of difference is not an advocacy for homogeneous interests. So just like the picture of the that I illustrated the other time, the Australian community has interest and the African community has interest, and interests sometimes are not always in alignment, especially when we talk about the political interest involved. So for Eze, cosmopolitanism is not impartial. So it now strikes that there's a tension that we'll be looking at in the course of this discourse. So for MonaMedia, Ubuntu commits us to the global community as an interdependent whole. We are all in all this together. But focusing on local needs or the locals should be the starting point. So there, the point that you could see is this thinking raised some complexity for how we navigate real life problems. If we look at point 1, 3, 4, and 6, point 1 from the table, point 3, point 4, and point 6 above commit us to the general condition of Ubuntu ontology. So all the 4 points do not contradict the central tenet of Ubuntu that we talked about above, but point 2 and 3 are very problematic. And it raises a main concern for us. Even point 7, point 2, 3, and 7 are really concerned for us. So let's see how we navigate this problem. So we need to look at this progress that we have seen, and we need to navigate them. But how do we do this and apply them to our environmental situation? So let's look at the neglected progress anew. We've said that moderate decolonization is required in order for us to address our problem, that we must not only focus on what we have in common with others in deciding what matters, otherwise what matters to us will be what is in our interest alone. So we must focus on the environment and all its multiple inhabitants. So that raises another concern. If we are going to focus on them, then how do we navigate this idea of interdependency? So justice in international and humanist is a condition for environmental justice. So let's go back to the complexity. So complexity of global justice concerns, consider these claims, consider the claim that I have identified in the preceding slide. So you can see that Ubuntu is saying that it's unacceptable to sacrifice our obligation to others based on partiality. But the problem with a table idea here is that it seems to have misconstrued the idea of partiality with the idea of proper self-love. For example, I'm an individual, I have my individual interest, individual well-being, and it is, if you make it my obligation, for example, to save a particular animal that is in the cost of book fire, and I am not equipped to do so, I might not be able to do that because I'm trying to maybe protect my bodily integrity, not to be injured, or perhaps I'm not capable. So it is not an obligation that we can say it is impartial. It is partial because I'm partial or I'm selfish because I did not carry out that obligation. So this applies to its applications that the West must also forgive animals, Africans' debt, and it's an obligation for them to do. Otherwise, they will not be performing the role of caring that Ubuntu suggests. But the problem is that Eze ideas seems to help navigate this problem by saying that cosmopolitanism is not impartial. We are not just saying because we are part of the global world, we do not have differences. So these differences that we have is a condition for us to accommodate others, and in the process of accommodating others, then we will need to now set out a solution within our home boundaries. For example, in Uganda, those who are interested in protecting Sitatunga, for example, could develop, will pay more attention to them within their environment, and to pay more attention, or perhaps collect a lot of data on how environmental impact from other communities are affecting them. Perhaps we've seen an example in the case of Niger Delta, where the activities of organization, multinational companies are affecting the region, and there we need now focus on how what they are doing. The oil exploration is said is not a concern, it's not a problem, but how oil exploration is done is the major problem. So it is not that the person is investing in an economy, for example, to make profit is the major concern. But the problem is that how the business is organized. The problem is not with the investment, but the nature of the person investing and the institution regulating the activities of those companies. So MonaMedia ideas now is very forward-looking. It said we should focus on. We should begin from the local dimension in order to be able to address the problem within our environment. This one has a positive impact, and the positive impact is that we are looking inward to see how we can address this problem within our context. But this local solution still overlooks the problem of environmental externalities. That environmental externalities is not caused locally. If we address, even this can help us decolonize, but at a point, more to decolonize the discourse, But the main concern is that environmental externalities beyond the control of the receiving country, and that is a critical concern for me. So can local standardization avoid impartiality if interest play into environmental decision making? I'm about running up, but before I do that, so let's look at this picture. It helps to show a glance of the environment. We can see the forest is there. We can see soil and river. These are the domain of animals. And this part of the environment, apart from there, we have cities, we have towns. So mostly, this part of the environment are overlooked in the sense that they are not always accounted for when we talk about localization. This is a location of some other species, and they should form an important part of our theory of localization, as we found in the discourse of MonaMedia. So localizing involves locating urbans in the environment. So we need to locate them in their environment. So when we talk about environment, we're not talking about cities. We're talking about trees being an environment. So that's why Ubuntu scholars in the traditional time talk about trees being the habitat of gods, of divinities, but not in that sense. We are looking at it more in a more scientific way, that trees are the habitat of animals, like birds, like koala, like snakes, and all the animals there living there. Soil is also the habitat of other species. There will be no progress if we disconnect ourselves from this environment. So our environmental needs now is something that differ from those of others. So if we talk about environmental needs, so people within the context of Africa, for example, might be looking at the issue of poverty, shelter, clothing, employment. Others might be looking at desire for energy, desire for employment. Like yesterday, for example, if it is 33 or minus 33 degree, then definitely we need to use energy for us to be able to survive during harsh weather. So in order for us to build roads, construct trees, we might use part of the environment for this. So we are not achieving environmental balance in the sense that we are keeping everything intact. But what we're doing is we're trying to see how we can navigate and negotiate our interests in such a way that we put certain elements into consideration. So locating environmental problems allow us to identify where the shoe pinches and others' worries and fear. So when we talk about locating environmental, so our concern is how the locals have awareness of where the problems they face but the fact that they are aware, well, does not necessarily mean they have the solution. Just as in the Western society, it does not follow that they have all the solutions to the problem within their environment. So they may need ideas from Ubuntu in order to understand the environment very well and navigate it, just as we also within the African environment requires understand some level of interaction with them to be able to grasp certain development within their intellectual system of scholarship to address fundamental challenges that we face. But key point is that local standardization requires something very important. It requires valuing difference. So when you're even localizing your environmental thought and the policy, you must value difference. You must incorporate multiple beings, and you must also develop what we call active moral agency. And that's the purpose of active moral agency is what the idea of humanness shows. So in concluding this part, how do we marry all these things together? The first thing is that environmental justice requires a deliberate practice of protecting biodiversity. And we cannot talk about protecting local environment without talking about biodiversity. Protecting biodiversity requires active moral agency, and the concept of humanness here needs to be developed further in order to show how this active agency comes to play in practical terms. So agents are always located within unique environment, and they have interest in that environment. So we need to negotiate our interests. So the major solution lies in negotiating interest. So negotiating interest requires you building the kind of people that can actually negotiate interest, the kind of people that have nature at the back of their mind, that have this understanding of the environment as a system that is part of our being. So negotiating interest requires caring for others who might be affected by our actions and ensuring that their well-being is primarily considered. And that is the problem of colonization and environmental externalities. The interests of Africa are not put into consideration, just as how the activities of Africans that affect other neighboring African countries must follow this pattern of thinking. And I think this can help us broaden how we look at this problem in more details. Thank you very much, Mercy.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. On many fronts, you have delivered very insightful, profound ideas relating to Ubuntu and justice ecology. I believe that, let me speak for myself. I've been well informed, I've been educated about a number of issues, and part of doing that is also sparking further avenues for investigation, which I believe will then instigate questions for discussion. And I have, I made a summary somehow of the presentation, but it's best we utilize the time available to engage with the lecturer. And I would encourage those who may have questions to make it very brief so that we can have a robust discussion. And if you do have clarifying comments, please also make such comments very brief so that we can all benefit from the wealth of wisdom from our lecturer. At the bottom of the screen, you will see something that says more. When you look at that, or even when you look at reactions, you can simply raise hands by clicking on the raise hands, just as I have done. And when you have finished, when you have been identified and you have finished your question, then you can lower it again. Let us take a couple of questions, maybe 2 or 3, and then have our lecturer respond. Then we take another round. I don't see anybody's hand up currently. All right, so I believe when you have a very brilliant presentation that is so clear, probably that is why nobody has any questions. Oh, Dr. Mosulu, I see that hand. Please make it direct and brief. Dr. Mosulu.
Thanks, Prof. Our presenter, thanks. You gave us themes that we can learn from Ubuntu thinking. And the third one is humanness. And if you really understand the trajectory of environmental ethics, is how to recommend a solution that will not be anthropocentric. That submission that we should address environmental justice from the humanist perspective. Don't you consider it to be an anthropocentric solution again? Because we need to consider our justice approach from the non-human elements of the environment for there to be justice in the real sense of it. But your recommendation is still highly anthropocentric, and I have my worry for that. Again, if we were to consider ecological issue, we have developed countries, they use the resources of nature for their own benefit, and we have underdeveloped or developing countries. I want to bring the issue of poverty into this context. If we are to preserve the environment, don't you think that will be widening the gap between the poor and the rich in Africa, for an example? So I need your reactions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? I don't see any other hand. Maybe I could expand more on that if there is no other hand that is up. Dr. Mosulu mentioned anthropocentrism.
Yes, there is one more reaction. Sorry. Thera Edwards.
I don't see any sign. No hand raised for Thera Edwards.
Yes, my hand is up. It has been up.
Oh. All right, it just came up.
No, well,
so, over to you.
I came in right after the previous person. I just found the concept of moderate decolonization very interesting because the general thinking is that as far as possible to reverse colonization and its legacies and its impact. And the truth is that colonization, the whole colonial experience, is so embedded in so many ways, on the peoples, on the psyche, environmental alteration, for clearance, for agriculture, introduction of species, so many things that in some ways it's almost impossible to remove from the identities of some of the countries where this experience happened. And it is refreshing to hear that it has to be done moderately. It cannot be an erasure, but a recognition of the humans, the non-human actors, and how these need to come together in a recognition, in a humane way, to work at the process. But it cannot really be one of erasure. There has to be some striking of a balance. So I was very struck by that concept, and wanted to thank the presenter for what it triggers in terms of a thought process for dealing with the effects of colonialism.
Thank you so much. Any other hand? All right. Well, let me, before Dr. Olusegun Samuel responds, let me just add one or two things to the questions or the points just made. One is about anthropocentrism, the second is about humaneness, and the third is about moderate decolonization. The three of them are interrelated, but let me help to make the questions probably more. Is it possible to have a non-anthropocentric, in other words, can we have a different point of view that is not human in solving the ecological challenges that we face, since we are the human beings who are doing the thinking? And also, on the question of decolonization, moderate decolonization, would that not be capitulating? In other words, what would be achieved if you now want to live in hybrid form? Bearing in mind that a lot is lost. These are not my own direct questions. I'm only helping to see, you know, if I can help to understand those questions as they resonate in my own mind. Dr. Samuel?
All right, thank you very much for the questions and the comments. Tara, thank you for your comments on moderate decolonization. Okay, let me answer the question first raised by Dr. Omosulu. Omosulu, the concept of humanness in the context of the talk is not talking about human-centeredness. Humanness is an ethical concept of active moral agency that speaks to the personhood of the person carrying out moral decision, or that is engaged in policy deliberation. For example, when we talk about those who are in charge of policy or that make policy concerning how the environment will be governed, we're saying that they are the ones who are more concerned in terms of how we can adjust our behavior or attitude towards the environment, because they formulate policy upon which our society will be governed, say, for example, environmental policy. So what humanness is doing there is, humanness is helping us to decolonize moderately. It says that I'm developing the capacity for moral agency in such a way that I take, for example, let's talk about Edwin's idea. I care about the project of others. That means when I'm taking decision, I do not only look within the lens of my society, I also consider how my actions will affect those who live outside my community. So there, we are not using human capacity or human characteristics to define what is morally acceptable. So the idea of difference that we found in Eze helps to show that we need to recognize differences. And when we talk about differences, we have it in different dimensions. We have women. So when we make empowerment law, when we're trying to make environmental policy or form an environmental institution, for example, women will be included in that part. We do not only form a male structure environmental institution where everyone that is there is a male. Also, when we talk about environmental policy also, we are not also looking at how it will benefit only the Western society. We also look at how that can impact the other. So these ideas are interconnected. So difference is important for you to be able, recognizing difference is important for you to be able to carry out humanness. And if you look at Nanato, the idea there is that, but when we talk about this difference, it's not only constituted in the sense that we focus on humans, we also look at difference, and that's why we talk about the plurality in the context of how we deal with what counts for us. So what counts for us, if you look at the scientific explanation of what counts, the central measuring tool is sentience, and sentience only focuses on animals that can suffer. But we all know that some animals their capacity to suffer or feel pain might be delayed, and we cannot really tell who or which animals at this time is sentient, especially when we do not have their knowledge, we do not have mental entrance into their what I call mental history, how they can relate. This we only see them that they display some cause and effect decision. When we eat them, they react in certain way. But we know that they can feel pain and they can die. So our thinking will move from whether they can experience well-being. We will look to whether they can die. We will look at whether they can be destroyed. So there we are broadening our understanding of the environment and looking at all the other beings that are there, taking cognizance of difference, that means their nature, in determining what we include in our list. And you said something about global resources, that with the idea of global justice, if I get you right, you're saying global resources is used in such a way that it's likely to widen the gap between the rich and the poor. Well, when we talk about the complexity of environmental concerns, you must pay attention to this complexity, because that is the real life concerns that we are bedeviled with. So first, humans' interests are different. So people that are in Africa, for example, when you look at the issue of poverty, poverty can constitute a situation whereby people might not even obey environmental law because they want to keep themselves alive. And that is something that if we are humane, then we can think that we can see their context, we can understand their situation. So we understand their worries. So we are not just making an irrational or what we call theoretical principles or ideas that doesn't really take into cognizance what is actually happening. These people are poor, so definitely, and they are interdependent with other beings. Other beings are sources of their livelihood. So we are not saying that the idea of the environment, because we want to preserve the environment, then using these resources is something that we should prohibit. We cannot do so, because that is what Ubuntu is saying, that we are interdependent and we depend on this thing for our survival. And the critical question is about how we look at anthropocentrism, humanism, and moderate decolonization. Professor Bewaji wants to know whether it is possible for us to have a non-anthropocentric thinking when it is us humans that are determining what the policy should look like or what matters. Yes, we can have a non-anthropocentric thinking. What non-anthropocentric thinking emphasizes in the context of Ubuntu is that I count, you count, other things count. So I should not use my parameter as a basis for determining whether they count. I should not say because I can feel, they cannot feel, so they do not count. So Ubuntu is opening us up to see differences as part of things that are in the part of to see others' differences as something that is part of the like a deontological constitution of being. And as a result of that, then the context would be, can we have non-anthropocentric? Yes, we can have non. But when we look at what will now feature in that we are making the decision, that is where the idea of interest now come into play. My interest might be to survive, and I need a particular animal or particular food, for example, that I want to consume particular animals. In as much as I'm doing that within the moderate sense that I'm not taking into extension a family or being, or perhaps I'm not affecting in other species or other environment in a way that I cannot reasonably justify. It's because we can reasonably justify our feeding on certain things that it becomes acceptable within the Ubuntu context. And
yeah, please try and round up. We still want to accommodate more questions.
Okay. The idea of moderate, the idea whether we can be on our own, that we do not need moderate, like you talk about the hybrid community. Well, what really matters is that no one is an isolated being, and this triggers our conception of what it means to be a human. So if I am part of the world and I cannot run away from it, then definitely it is part of my biological nature to relate with others, learn from others. And so we need to be open to that. And that is what Ubuntu is trying to help us do with the concept of humanness.
Yes, thank you so much. I don't see any other hand. So maybe I can take the liberty of making a couple comments.
Okay.
Then, okay, I see one hand there. That's Ms. Tanisha Gibbs.
Yes.
Can you unmute yourself? And thank you. Ms. Gibbs, you're on the floor. She's unmuted. Can you hear us? All right, while that is being sorted out, maybe I could use a couple seconds. Ms. Gibbs? Okay. Yes, the question I wanted to raise, Dr. Samuel, is this. And the way you answered the questions originally posed actually is like you took the bait. So let me put it on. Those who originated Ubuntu and the concept of Omoluabi, did they ever envision a universe of human lookalikes, beasts from the north, whose only institutional focus is taken from everyone else to enrich themselves, and when questioned, visit the victim with horrors? Because the way I see it is that Ubuntu is to work in a totally different world. And that led me to the next question. Can an ontology built on dominion over nature, where some human beings are regarded as part of lower nature, practice justice ecology? Because the challenge that we face in the world, which is playing out in Europe, in the heart of Europe, as well as in Palestine, and in the relationship between the developed and the developing worlds, is both ontological and metaphysical. And therefore, can you use Ubuntu to help those whose only way of relating to others is violence? Can you, have a justice ecology in an environment where people live in different worlds like that? I don't know if Ms. Gibbs has fixed the technical glitch. Can you please unmute? Please take Ms. Gibbs. Mine is not particularly important. Please, if Ms. Gibbs is able to fix the mic, can you please raise your... Yes, Ms. Gibbs? We can see the mic is on mute. Oh, sorry, it says mic is not working. Let me see if there are chats. Only one chat. Okay, Dr. Stephen, please.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much for that question. I think it's an interesting question and got me thinking. I think the solution is, first of all, understand Ubuntu as a way of looking and a way of seeing and a way of acting. Then we see that Ubuntu philosophy is quite different from the ontology that you mentioned. But what is very important for us to emphasize is that the other way of looking that's characterized with violence is not a characteristic of human person. It's just an attitude that was developed over time. It's not something that, okay, because these people are born, then they are born with this kind of characteristic. I think Ubuntu idea of socialization is something that is very interesting. Yeah, a person is a person through other person. So when we create a system whereby, or social institution whereby the value is about promoting humanity, caring for others, and this thing is not something people just pick up. They need to embody it, and the process of embodiment is a process of learning, is a process of relearning, is a paper of encounter. So, for example, those who have not a conservationist who has not visited Africa, for example, the conservationist, if the conservation see a local plant that the people cherish, the conservation might consider it to be a weed, because the conservation lacks a knowledge of that plant. So you might look at it and say, oh, this is a weed. Maybe it's within the where the person comes from, it is characterized as a weed. But the people will need to show that no, this is not. This is what it is meant for. So in the process, the person can start to understand that, oh, I've erroneously characterized this as a weed. And that is the process of reawakening. That is, the person now tends to recognize. So Ubuntu ontology on one side is an ontology that one can just see and test for its validity based on our perception of reality. Is it true that I'm self-sufficing? No. Am I unlocated? No, I'm located. Does my action impact others? Yes. Am I isolated in this world? So the ontology opens to light the fact of our interconnectedness with others, even those that are considered as being exploitative. So by so doing, then the awareness and knowledge can help them broaden their perspective. So it's a process of broadening perspective. That is why when we recognize that the ontology upon which the current world order is governed doesn't really help to address the problem, then we need to push Ubuntu forward. And that is the process of trying to show what it is to adopt Ubuntu to address concrete problem. The idea of lower and higher, higher human being, that is a wrong, that's an ethical crisis, an ethical way of looking. And that is why Ubuntu lens could help them correct that. For those who champion on that. But for Omoluabi, I think Omoluabi has certain elements with Ubuntu. I've not really worked on Omoluabi. It's something that I am considering to work on, but I know that Omoluabi has the same certain metaphysical, what do I call it, conditions that I developed in Ubuntu philosophy, or that I talked about earlier.
Let me read out the question from Dr. Isoken. It says, it says, can Ubuntu philosophy and justice ecology help rectify injustice whereof taking the wealth of one society to sustain another? Well, that's the issue that we are raising. That's the issue. The challenge specifically, which Dr. Samuel may also have to look at, is the fact that all these alternative ontologies emanate from non-persons, according to Eurocentric fake universalism. So how do you use an ontology from a non-person to now civilize a beast who doesn't, want to listen to anything, who is entrenched in his own ontology, that his own ontology is superior to every other thing? And if you try to challenge him too much, then all hell would, loosen up on you. The same thing happened in the Belgian Congo, where millions of people were annihilated over a short period of things. It happened to the American Indians. It happened to all the indigenous peoples in the Americas, in Australia, in New Zealand, and it's still happening in different ways now. So it's not a simple matter.
Well, that's why we said it is a complex questions and a complex problem that we are looking at. First, let's take back this take us back to the discussion about colonization. Colonization is just like taking what belongs to another person. It could be their land and their resources therein. And how will Ubuntu help help rectify injustice where people take the weight of one community and take it elsewhere to sustain another community? Well, in contemporary times, I think we need to create more Ubuntu in that sense. If we are going to address this problem, I think violence is not a solution to the kind of context we are looking at. And if the problem is a problem of what I call it, ideological tool for the exploitation of those who are within the developing countries, I think the solution first is to create people that operate or that controls institutions within the African territory. If I take that as an example, if they are people who have developed this, what I call it, have embodied virtue of caring for their people, I think it will be very difficult for them to allow much of these things that we're experiencing in the practical terms of it. But it takes negotiation of power. One suggestion that I have in mind, I'll still keep thinking about this, is at the level of United Nations. Maybe the institution is not doing too much in trying to address, but a lot has been done to address some of this concern. Maybe the African community, for example, need to speak up in terms of their inclusion in the what I call United Nations, or perhaps strengthen the African Union. But most of these problems require local solutions, and I see that most of the complaints has always been that this thing is forcefully done, and but there's something we can do within our environment. For example, if you have $10,000 and you have people within your community, you have trees destroying your community, there's a way you can regulate the activities of organizations that operate within your environment, if all things being equal. That's how you embody virtues. So when all these things are left in the hands of those who are interested in economic wealth themselves within the African regions, just as Charles, what's his name? Claude Ake said, the problem we generate into the internalists trying to support those externalists who indulge in such activities. So it's not a easy fixed kind of solution. So it's a gradual thing. First understands that we understand the environment and how it works, so that people that are in place taking policy decision could be aware on how this impacts. It's not that most are not aware, but it's because they've also not developed the humanness in such a way that they care for their environment and such.
Yes, thank you so much. I think we are running out of time, but let me read Ms. Gibbs and then hand over to Dr. Omosulu. For AIMS here, colonization is about dehumanization. What's the difference between colonization and European culturalism? Between Ubuntu and universalism, between nature and environment? What are the fundamental environmental problems and location? And does the environment problem include economic challenges? As such part of decolonization suggests that people who are dehumanized I believe those are questions that will take, longer.
Yeah, there are longer questions.
Yes, I saw Dr. Mosulu's hand. I believe he must have been warning us that we are running over time.
Over time, okay.
Yes.
No, I wanted to ask a question.
Oh, you want to ask a question?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yes, please ask it, and then, and if Dr. Samuel can briefly respond to these comments, very briefly, with your permission, because you are the boss.
I should ask my question?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Dr. Samuel, our presenter, you have brought Ubuntu to us, and I consider it that you are trying to force it down our throats, as if that it is something very unique to the world. If Ubuntu embodies care for others, what about respect for nature that we can also find in other cultures? What is so unique about this Ubuntu that you are trying to use as a paradigm to resolve environmental justice?
All right, thank you very much for the question. In the case of projecting Ubuntu as something very important that we should take cognizance of, I think the indigenous people of Africa are thinking, exercising their agency. So exercising agency is something that is fundamental for you to navigate some of the challenges that you faced within this contemporary time. And the fact that Ubuntu and the ethics of respect for nature, these are philosophies from different background, and ethics of respect for nature, as you see, for example, in Taylor's view, you can see that the primary assumption that governs the consideration of beings. So you can see that because they are teleological centers of life, life is only criteria for the inclusion of being into that box. That idea omits rock, it omits trees, it omits. So there's a kind of disconnection between that theory. It's just like it's pre-selected. So when you look at ontology is something that is there. So it is something that you need to explain as it is. And Ubuntu has been able to capture this ontology, I think, to an extent. Not a total, Ubuntu is not a total view. That is why the concept of difference is there. So we accommodate difference. If we look at, when I talk about Munanato, we talk about those criteria that he gave, for example, talking about well-being, talking about life, talking about sentience, talking about ability to commune. You can see the plurality of ideas, they're coming into place. But what really stands out is that something counts for Ubuntu when something has a stake. So the poor people that are poor have a stake, and that counts for the environment. The animals have a stake. Even where we live, the habitat have a stake. So this thing, Ubuntu is just like kind of showing us, look this way. So whether you accept it is now something that is debatable. Whether it is what I call it, it's something you really want to adjust to suit. So I'm saying that people in the Caribbean, for example, have their own world outlook on how the environment should be organized. So the Caribbean, for example, in the environment can come up with their own indigenous idea and see how that interconnects with Ubuntu thinking and perhaps interconnect with the ethics of respect for nature and tease out the most important part, and those that are very complicated and degrading should be removed.
Thank
and
you.
That is what we think we should do.
Thank you so much. Well, the way the discussion is usually framed makes it seem as if it's just about human beings. I am because we are. Okay, but that's not the totality of it, because most communities in Africa, they understand that nature is very significant to our well-being. And consequently, respect for nature, not domination, not the kind of madness that you find in the ontology that, you know, is overarching in Western capitalist Christian or Islamic world, where human beings were so-called created and to have dominion. No, that's not it.
Yeah.
We are part of nature. That is what Ubuntu means. Respect, respect for nature. Things you simply don't do to nature, even if you have the power. But the framing, the discussion at times gets lost. That was why I raised the anthropocentrism issue, because we are humans, but it doesn't mean that we don't know, you know, that the welfare of the rat is also the welfare of the bird. Because if one does not rest, the other cannot rest. If human beings want peace, they must give peace to reality, to nature, to everything around them. It's a huge concept. But, you know, I want to thank you very much and hand over to my boss, Dr. Omosulu, to, you know, do the honors. Thank you so much. I really
Thank you,
Dr.
Professor Obewaji.
Dr. SOS.
Thank
That's
you so
what
much.
somebody sent somewhere. You know, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
All right, Professor Bewaji, I want to begin my vote of thanks by thanking our guest lecturer, Dr. Olusegun Samuel. When I contacted you, you had a busy schedule, but you created time out of it to honor my invitation. And I am convinced beyond any reasonable doubt that you have done justice to the topic. What I learned before now, you have made me to relearn something. So I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
And I want to also say that discussion and conversation can continue on this topic after the end of the program. Professor Silva Coenberg, the Dean of Faculty of Art, thanks for honoring our invitation. My HOD, Dr. Vivette Missing-White, your opening remarks, even though I wasn't here when you gave it, but it did justice to the program. Thanks for that. Ms. Conner, thanks for introducing our guest speaker. And I must also add that you went out of your way to seek information on the guest speaker, different from what I gave you, and that really added color to the event. Thanks for that. Dr. Janice Smith, you designed the flyer, and your expertise must be appreciated, and that's why I'm thanking you. So anybody that received the flyer, you should know that a philosopher actually designed it. Thanks for that. Whenever we have any program, you will be called upon to design another program. Mr. Donik Sama, you created the Zoom platform that we are presently using now to have this program. I want to appreciate you, and I also want to appreciate Ms. Avamonde, who contacted the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, University of the West Indies, on the behalf of the section, philosophy section, and on the behalf of the department. Thanks for that. Every member of the department, every member of the DLLP, I want to appreciate your support. Ms. Shimio, Ms. Dustin Staple, Ms. Mondi White, I want to thank all of you. Members of the philosophy section, thanks for your support. My esteemed students, without you, this program wouldn't have enjoyed the kind of attendance that we have. Students from environmental ethics, I want to particularly thank you, because this period is the time that we're supposed to have our lecture, but you are also receiving lecture indirectly. Thanks for your attendance. Students from Logic and members of staff from UWI, I also want to thank you. Others, participants outside Jamaica, in Africa, in Europe, thanks for your attendance. We normally have our public lecture once in an academic year. So when it is time to hold the next one in the next academic year, be rest assured that we will also reach out to you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Mosolo. Bye.